Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. We're really excited to share with you today some benchmarks and some audience trends that we're seeing in the industry and some May results specifically. So I'm Brooke Hunziker. I'm a manager at Mather, and I'll be introducing Luke Magerko and Pete Doucette to kind of walk us through what we're seeing today. Luke, if you want to go to the next slide, I can run through the agenda quickly. So I'll do a quick introduction of the data and who we are, and then we'll dive into the industry trends and what the data that we're looking at is. We'll touch on artificial intelligence, what's been in the news recently, and kind of digesting that out of the data that we're seeing specifically. And then we'll end on what's working and talk a little bit about the content and how we can put this information into practice. We'll leave 10 minutes at the end for questions and conversations, but please there's a chat box in the bottom right and also a questions portal. So the questions should be anonymous. You can use either one. I'll monitor both throughout, and happy to ask Luke and Pete on your behalf if you don't want to speak up. So Luke Magerko is going to be really driving this conversation. He is a managing director at Mather and a data scientist by trade. So he'll be able to walk us through what this data means, how to interpret it, and what we're looking at exactly. This is a part one of a 3-part series of a webinar, and this one is a little bit more data heavy, and then we'll be bringing in guest speakers as we go and talking about specific publishers. Pete Doucette is a senior managing director. He runs our consulting practice, the strategic consulting practice at Mather. And so he has tons of experience both on the publisher side and the consulting side. So he'll be able to help us kind of interpret what this means and figure out how to put it into practice. So again, this is just a quick overview. We'll spend 15 minutes on the first 2 parts and then 10 minutes on the content and understanding how we're putting this into practice and what's working. The data itself, we're looking at the top 100 US brands and then our listener clients. So our listener platform is how we're tracking clients and their engagement and web performance. So you can see we crossed the US in the publishers that we're looking at. And the next slide kind of breaks down the sections that we'll be talking about. So you'll see top 25 news media, 26 to 50, mid-level, small news, and micro news media. And if you're wondering kind of how those categories are set, these will all shift each month as engagement and as these metrics shift. But if you're wondering where everybody fits in, these are just an example of the top 4 or 5 in those categories. So you can see the competitors and where certain publishers may lie. So I believe I'll pass it off to Luke now to get you started and talk about what we're seeing in the data. Again, feel free to ask questions throughout. Use the chat and questions and chat me if you need any assistance.
Thank you, Brooke. And just to underscore, the 450 brands that we are analyzing are available to you. So if you have questions, feel free to contact me or Pete or Brooke at the end of the presentation, and we will show you the brands that we chose and where you would fall in that list. So as Brooke stated, the first part of this is industry results. The first 3 sets of information that we're going to provide are showing the industry writ large, essentially the groups that Brooke just showed, and then how individual brands are doing. What you're looking at then on the slide is how the industry is performing after all. So you're looking here at year-over-year results starting in 2023, working all the way over to the second quarter of 2025. As a reminder, 2025 only has 2 months. So what you're looking at here in the year-over-year comparison is April and May. You can see, and we'll start here in the middle, you can see that there was a nice ramp up year-over-year with the political season. So in the first quarter of 2024, ostensibly flat year-over-year, which is good because you were coming off a very strong 2023. You can see that in 2024, the second quarter, you see a bump going up from 5% and 4%. Interestingly enough, most of that bump came at the end of June, because if you remember back, that was when the debate happened between Presidents Biden and Presidents Trump. You can see the election gain here in Q3 of 2024. There were strong visitors in the fourth quarter. However, page views dropped decidedly. And again, we can pretty much target that to the time after the election. It seems as if the amount of news that was being consumed went down dramatically. Finally, in Q1, that decline remains. So now you're looking at a decline here in the first quarter compared to, again, a flat first quarter in 2024. And then in the second quarter so far, in both April and May, you've seen double-digit declines across the industry, tallying out at 16.7% for visitors and 17.8% for views. One other bit of information that's important to remind you, in this part of the analysis, we are eliminating the New York Times, because the New York Times currently has all of their products actually running through NewYorkTimes.com. So what you would see is the Wordle and the Athletic and all of those page views in there as well, and it does distort the numbers. So we are eliminating it from this specific slide. We'll talk about them a little bit more throughout the presentation, but for now, these numbers are specifically what we would call the news media. So I'll pause there, ask for any questions. Okay, moving on. The second one then, to Brooke's point, is we did break down the media into the 6 groups, New York Times being one specific group, and then the 5 Brooke mentioned before. There are 25 in both the top 25 and the 26 through 50. We have 100 in the mid-level group, 164 in the small news media, and then what we're calling the micro news media represents 145 brands. We are using a series of filters to put the magazines into these categories, but most notably, we're looking at visitors and where the visitors trends are going. On this chart, what you're looking at then is color scheme. So usually when you look at a chart like this, you're looking for green. Green is going to show you your best performers. Yellowish green and yellow are in the middle, and then red is going to show you the worst performers over time. Again, this is looking at 2025, the second quarter. You can see that, again, the New York Times we keep out of the mix, but they were essentially flat. For the most part, the 2 largest sections are having poor performance, but they were coming off very strong performances last year. So if you look at this, they are slightly down compared to 2023, but again, in fairly good shape. The mid-level essentially neither had a very large bump when it came to page views and visits, and they didn't have that much of a decline in the second quarter of 2025. When we look at the small and the micro section, the economic term is a secular decline. A secular decline in this instance means that this trend is going and it continues to go over a 24-month period. And if we were to forecast this out, we are not seeing any types of growth in the foreseeable future. In this instance, the foreseeable future means 6 months. Okay.
Hey, Luke.
Yes, sir.
One of the things that I think is interesting with this chart is that if you were to draw a diagonal line from like the lower left corner to the upper right corner, you would see kind of the color scheme being more in the orange and red, which to me means to your point, the secular declines have been coming almost inversely related to the size of the publisher. So for smaller publishers, it's been over a few years, and now it's catching up with the larger publishers. So I think that's a really interesting point, particularly as we go into future discussions about what's impacting this, et cetera. I think that it's important to have the context that there's clearly a secular decline, I think, which publishers know, but this kind of shows just how pronounced it's been based on publisher size.
Exactly. And again, when there's major events, you can still see the bump. But to your point with that, with the line going through it, yeah, if you didn't have a lot of national coverage, you did see your numbers actually continue that decline, even though there was activity that could have helped. So what we're looking at here then is the first chart was designed to show you overall numbers. This is to show you the group. The next slide is very interesting to us because what this is going to show, and we're going to work through this chart in a moment.
Hey, Luke, before we
Yes.
move on, could you also just explain the difference between micro news and small news so we can get grounded in that?
Yes, as I mentioned, we're looking at visitors and how many people are coming to the site. When you think about it, Brands can have anywhere from 10 million visitors a month all the way down to say 10 to 15,000 a month. We have a lot of brands at Mather that are considered fairly small. So what you're looking at is these are the smaller towns having the local newspapers. So again, if you were to think about it, towns that have a newspaper with 30 to 100,000 people in it, those would be the newspapers that we're describing. The smaller is the next size up.
And Luke, do you have the specific number, what the cutoffs are between the groups?
I can provide that as part of the package when clients ask for it. But yes, we will be happy to provide that information.
Okay.
Okay. So again, in showing you this chart, what we're saying is that there are secular declines across entire groups with 145 and 164 media brands, 125s. What this chart is showing is something called a box and whisker chart. And we're going to walk through how this works. On the left-hand side of the chart, this is what we would consider the worst performer. The group here is considered the bottom quartile, the mid quartile, the median, above average or the third quartile, and then the best quartile of all. So the top 25% lives right here. This right line is usually showing the best performer out of the group. If you are on either side of the line, like the Post Standard here on the top 25, that's saying that you're an outlier. If you're to the right of the line and you're an outlier, that's excellent. You had a great month. If you're to the left of the line and an outlier, it was less than successful. So we just wanted to point this out to you because what we want to share is overall, we're showing negative information for all the groups in the second quarter. This slide is specifically designed to show in May of 2025, 12% of the brands in the top 25 actually outperformed year over year. Again, 12% in the 20 through 26 through 50 overperformed. And then even when I tell you about secular declines in these lower three tiers, nearly a third of the brands in each of them actually performed month over month higher than they did the previous year. So I point this out for two reasons. Number one, it is not a uniform decline across all brands across all of the United States. The second part is, and Brooke mentioned this a bit earlier, what we're doing starting with the second webinar is we're going to introduce you to some of the marketers and newsroom colleagues at some of these brands so they can tell you their story on how they're actually improving year over year and month over month. So again, the goal of this chart is to, again, just kind of get you settled in the idea that some brands are doing better than others.
So Luke, there is a positive lining to this. Now, while overall the trends may be down, there are some shining stars that we can look to as examples.
Exactly. And again, we'll just look at the top 25. Both the Tribune and the Post Standard had a great May. The Cincinnati Enquirer, the Globe, the Times-Picayune had a great May. The Clarion Ledger, Home Tribune, News Journal, etc. So yeah, and that's our goal is to provide information from them specifically to tell you why they're succeeding. Okay, moving on to the next one. This one is designed to start getting us into how the brands are actually interacting with the digital site. So there's a lot going on in this slide. So we're going to take a few moments to actually give you a grounding of what we're trying to accomplish. As you look at the vertical axis, you can see something that we're calling depth. What depth in our instance is views per visits, and then frequency is visits per visitor. So the further right that you go, the way we want to think about this, the further right on this chart, we think about brand strength. We think about people are coming to you consistently because they know they're going to get the information that they want. When you think about going up vertically on this chart, we think about content strength, because what that's saying is they're looking at many views once they show up to the site. That's good because what they're doing is they're spending more time on the page, they're reading more articles. So that is what we would consider strong content production. So what you're looking at here then is group one is what you're looking to be in, again, the upper right-hand quadrant. You can see here the Washington Post, the Seattle Times, the Cleveland Plain Dealer is having a very good run across the last 6 months, but you get a sense as to who's up in that upper right-hand quadrant. The second group you would want to be in is down here in the frequency visits per visitor. So in this instance, you're not getting as many page views, but you're getting a loyal group coming back often. What you can see here is that's led by the New York Post, the Wall Street Journal, the Portland Press Herald, etc. So again, a very strong group. Group three is interesting because what this is saying is this is views per visit. So again, what we're looking at here is the strong depth for the Kansas City Star, the Metro West Daily News, etc. The last group is the one that is underperforming, and you can see some of the brands in there. The thing that I want to point out, group one has just under 20% of all of the brands. Group two has 26%. Group three has about 5%. Nearly half the brands are, in this instance, showing weakness when it comes to depth and frequency. So we want to put that out there. And again, our goal in this presentation is to both show you these issues and then also help you try to figure out ways to move your brands up into the upper right.
So Luke, as a
So I'm going to
publisher, you
pause
want to
there.
be, sorry. I was just going to say, as a publisher,
Okay.
you want to be in the upper right quadrant. So is that, are we right to think that that's kind of the ceiling on where you can be?
It's an excellent question. So the way this chart works is they start both down here in the 1.0s because obviously you have a view or you have a visit as you show up. At the top here for views per visit, you see 3.6. Over here, you see 3.5 for the frequency. The next chart we want to show is we took the top 50 brands, and in so doing, what we did was we placed them, they're the turquoise color. We've added back the New York Times because, again, they're doing things slightly differently. So we want to kind of give you a baseline to see there. But then also we've added in television brands in order to get a sense as to what's going on with other news type brands. So what you're going to see here, the New York Times, again, pushes itself out away from everyone else. So you can see a stronger brand presence and you can see a stronger content presence. What you can then see down here in the bottom left, the 3 dark blue dots are NBC News, CBS News, and ABC News digital sites. And what you can see is those national brands are, in fact, actually underperforming all of the news media that we are currently tracking. What you can then see to the right, and again, this is visits per visitor. So the people who show up for NBC, for the business platforms, and for CNN, they're staying longer because they're having a lot of visitors. The last blue dot up there in the upper right is, in fact, Fox News. And what's interesting about this is, again, without any commentary on what they're producing, they have identified and successfully maintained their audience better than any other brand on there. What we're suggesting is that this right here is probably as high as you can go when you start thinking about views per visits and visits per visitor. They've been very successful at maintaining and their audience and having them come back regularly. So again, what you're looking at here, Fox News is approximately twice as much than the average brands for the 2 categories that we're looking at. So again, we just wanted to put some context around where the news media is, which, by the way, kind of clusters together in this area. And then we wanted to show you what some of the outliers would look like. So we'll pause there. Okay. So then in each section, we just very quickly want to do a key takeaway. So we're going to talk about these other 2 groups here in a minute. But again, as a reminder, overall results remain soft in Q2 compared to 2024. The smaller brands face the ongoing declines while the larger brands lag a little bit lower than their previous year. Roughly 30% of the brands achieved year-over-year growth. And then finally, engagement trends are consistent across brands with notable outperformance, believe it or not, against the TV brands that we were talking about. So I'm going to pause there, see if there's any questions or comments that we need to address. Okay, so we're moving on to the next section. And Pete, I'll defer to you to tee this section up if that's okay.
Yeah, thanks, Luke. So I think clearly a very topical thing is, what has the AI impact been like on search referrals? So there was an article in the Wall Street Journal that talked about the impact on like Business Insider, the Journal, some other national brands, saying there's this precipitous decline in search referral traffic. I know INMA has been looking at it as well to see, like, fact or fiction, how much is our AI impacting search results, and what publishers should really be thinking about that. So I'd love it if we could kind of dig into that a little bit.
And we will. So what we're going to do right off the bat is we're going to start with a primer. We're not going to go into full detail on this, but what we're going to try to show you is right now there are 4 specific tools that we describe when we talk about what AI is, what the Google AI effect is. We're going to talk in depth about AI overviews because that's the conversation that Pete just mentioned. AI search mode, Google Discover, and then Google News. We all know what Google News is. Google Discover, we just want to point out, I'm sure most on the call know, but that's the personalized content feed for the Android devices. And then the AI search mode, the AI mode is up here in the upper left-hand corner. That's drilling into what the AI overviews are producing. So AI overviews, then, how it works is it's a generative AI to synthesize information from multiple web pages into a single summary. So what you're seeing here on the side is a Des Moines Register article, what's happening with crime in the month of May inside of Des Moines. I do that because I'm living in Des Moines, and that would be a quick reference to see what's exactly happening in the city. Down below here is the AI mode. It's just a more in-depth version of what you're seeing in the overview. The impact, again, what the concern is, and Pete pointed this out, is, yeah, we're thinking that there's a replacement need to click through to the news articles. That's going to eliminate that. This, we think, is going to have a major drop in organic traffic, and then that's going to lead to less people showing up to the sites, which leads to lower ad revenue. We did some research, but we're going to start with research that was done by SEMrush in the last month in order to start identifying what is happening. And what we're going to determine is what impact AI overviews have had so far. The chart on the right is designed to show the share of queries triggering an AI overview. What you can see here is in January, it was 6.4%. By March, that number grew to 13. So as an emerging risk, that number has doubled. That's a significant change in the matter of 60 days. So what also came from the research is some categories specifically, and again, we're thinking this might be news. Some categories are reaching as high as 40%. Where we started learning things that I personally didn't know, 88% of AI overviews come up for informational queries. So again, we're thinking that that's where likely news and updates come from. So from a risk standpoint, we see AI overviews growing, and we see that the informational queries are where they're focused. But what we started to learn, and again, this is very important, 7 times more likely to get an AI overview with queries at least 8 words. So there's a potential ceiling for AI overviews, because if I were to ask the audience, I would ask what you would assume a normal search would be. I was stunned. The average current search is 1.9 words. So the reason why that's important, and we did an exercise a little while back about this, if you're looking for sports, our office is based out of Atlanta. If you're an Atlanta Braves fan and you type in Braves baseball, that generative AI has no idea what you're talking about. So when you type that into the search, it's not going to be able to tell you the overview of what you're trying to accomplish. The example for restaurants, as an example, restaurants near me. Again, there's not enough information for them to help you. However, if you were to write something more in depth, that I want restaurants in a certain part of town, or I want to know the odds of the playoff possibilities for the Braves, then AI overview is going to kick in. So it needs to be longer searches in order to trigger AI overviews. So, and again, as I said, we're calling this a potential ceiling because as of now, people who are actually writing the queries don't do that. So again, what we're looking at is there's somewhere between 40 and 60% of those queries are in that non-AI overview window. The second one, and this is the chart that I think is the most important for the conversation, the zero-click searches percentage of queries with no click. What this essentially is showing you is on the right-hand side, you see January, February, and March, about 43 to 47% of keywords with AI overviews are not getting to a second search. So that means someone put in a search, they read the overview, and they walked away. At those numbers, it sounds incredibly scary because, yes, that means that we are losing a lot of audience. What SEMrush actually did, which is very useful, is they then did the exact same test with keywords without AI overview. And what you can see here is that in a normal search before AI overview, or in a normal search with those 2 words, 36% to 34% also don't gain a click. So what you're looking at here is, for the most part, it's the differential between the 2 is what we see as the current risk. So you're looking at about 10% more people not coming to your site from this zero-click search concept that they actually shared. So there is an effect, but I think it's going to be lower, at least in the short term, than what people had anticipated. Long term, people will change their behavior and write longer search queries. But for now, that is what we see as the current risk. So I'll pause there. Any questions?
So Luke, it sounds like we're, so I was just going to say, it sounds like we're at the kind of the tip of the spear with the impact of AI overviews. And so it's growing. And so it's definitely having an impact, but probably not to the level that some publishers may think.
Correct. We are feeling very good about the fact that, yes, it is having an impact, and in the future it's going to continue. But right now, it is not causing the amount of decline in search as people may be thinking. So we, like I said, we pulled this from SEMrush. Now what we're going to do is talk about our own analysis inside. where we're going to create essentially a search traffic tool to help over the next few months keep an eye on this to see if things are changing. So what you're looking at on this page, and again, this is Similarweb data that we're using. Much like on the previous slide, the point of this is the hypothesis is if AI overviews grow, that should negatively impact performance on organic search because, again, those two are connected. What shouldn't happen is you should not see declines across direct or social display ads, et cetera, in the same level. So what you should see on the chart to the right is going to be a line here with organic search that's going to drop expeditiously. What we ended up doing, again, going back to that sheet where we had all the different brands, we established a statistical baseline for evaluating this across 50 benchmark brands, and we did 10 from each group. So what you're looking at here on the right-hand side is the share of visitors by channel for the top 10 of the top 25. So we took a sample of the top 25 and we placed it on this chart. For those of you who read the article in the Wall Street Journal, the organic line here in the middle, this part right here is what the chart showed for Business Insider, Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post. And what you can see here is that, yes, there is the election bump where they started getting more organic search. And then you see the decline. The decline that they show, I believe, was starting in January, and that's what you can see right here. The reason why we put this chart up with all the different groups, organic search second, direct first, social, and then everybody else, is just by looking at it, you can see that the trends here actually look very similar, irrespective of channel. The reason why that's important is, again, if the hypothesis holds that AI overviews is causing the issue, you should see the organic search line here dropping much more sharply than it is compared to everything else. Because as an example, email, display ads, and paid search have nothing to do with AI overviews. So it would be very hard to believe that these should be going in the same direction, knowing that they're two separate entities. This is why at this moment, again, to Pete's point earlier, we are feeling that, yes, there is some adverse effect and over time it's going to continue. But right now, we are not seeing strong correlation to the fact that organic search is being affected by the AI tool for the top 25 brands. So I'm going to pause here. Okay, let us move on to the next slide then, and let's look at this, see if it has an effect on different size publishers. So what we did here on the previous slide was we showed the lines. And again, this is not statistically valid. This is just us giving you a visualization of what we think is happening. Now we're going to go in and look at it statistically and see what this means. So again, if the hypothesis is AI overviews drive visitor declines, from a statistical standpoint, that's what you call correlation. So you should see as visitors drop, organic visitors should be dropping if the same level, if not more. What you're looking at here in this first chart is the correlation of the decline across all of the different referral channels for the top 25, along with organic search, et cetera. So what you can see here is organic search has an incredibly high amount of correlation. Anything to the right of this yellow line would be considered high correlation. You can see that, yes, organic search and the drop in visitors correlate perfectly. The part that was remarkable, and we were trying to figure this out, and we would love any input from the industry and anyone who's on the call. For the top 25, the correlation holds for referrals, social, direct, display, and email. They're all significant, which is a remarkable turn. So our current hypothesis is that the strong correlation between everything suggests that these large brands have a strong correlation because their marketing is more mature. For the brands that we're describing here, we assume that there are more people in the marketing department, more people in the audience department. And when there's content that needs to be pushed, it's pushed in all the channels. That is how this chart makes sense to us, because what this is suggesting is it doesn't matter the channel, it matters the content, and whatever's good, this part of the organization is doing a very good job ensuring that it's out in all of the different channels. Conversely, and before we move on, conversely, here is the 26 through 50 brands, and here's the small news. That yellow line exists again to say that, yes, organic search does correlate specifically to reduction in visitors, but it is less pronounced in socials and referral, emails, display ads, and paid search. The reason why this is important, and again, the same thing with the small, you see that organic search is correlative, but everything else is not. What that suggests to us is that inside of the top 25, there's a lot happening here to suggest that it's not only AI that's doing it. But for the smaller brands, if you think about the query I showed you for the Des Moines Register, that seems to be having an adverse effect on the smaller brands. And that's our concern. It's one of those situations right now that we're thinking that when we look at the correlation for the smaller brands, these brands are actually having more of an effect with AI than the bigger ones. Okay. Pete, are you there?
Yeah, I am sorry. I'm just having a little trouble with my camera, Luke. So I'll chime in as needed.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we move on. But at this point, again, we're going to pause there for any questions, comments. Okay, so from our standpoint, again, then when we look at the AI impact here on the takeaways of what we see so far with AI overviews and the effect, we looked at the 50 brands. We do see that the AI overview has doubled. And again, we will update this as soon as we possibly can, both with our own information using Similarweb, but when SEMrush reports it, hopefully by next month, we'll have April results of that as well. Again, the most interesting part for me is, again, the activations actually come in from longer search queries, meaning that in its current form, we are not seeing that much AI overviews because of the way people are currently using it. Again, the full impact at this moment, we're calling it unclear, though visitor decline strongly aligned with the disruptions on the larger brands. And then again, we're looking for something different when we talk about the smaller brands. So we're going to move on to the next section then. So in the third part of this, and we should be able to get this done in the next 8 minutes, Brooke. We've gone through the national results. We've gone through what we see as part of the artificial intelligence issue that is currently out there and what's happening. The third part that we're covering here is going to be what's working for an individual brand. And what we're going to try to show you is how everyone is using, how we would like people to use AI, what we show as a roadmap, and what has been effective so far. So we're going to show you a couple slides here from one of our existing customers. And what we want to point out on this is an audience analysis. What we like to do when we start any type of engagement with a client is we want to just plot out the page views for a story and the conversions for a story. And what we want to do here is we want to look at the section. In this instance, we picked 3 and we are specifically looking at them. And we just want to chart out where we see the strong stories, where we see the strong converting stories, the strong top of funnel stories, and then the stories that need an opportunity for improvement. And it's the same type of matrix where we have the quadrant. So the top quadrant here is a very strong top of funnel, but not a great conversion funnel. So what these stories are providing is a lot of page views. Quadrant 2 is where you want to be, because what you're looking at in this one is a very strong conversion set and a very strong page view set. Down here in quadrant 3, what we're looking at is a very strong conversion set, but not as many page views. And then unfortunately, this is the group again that we're looking to find improvement. Where it's interesting, and by the research that we've done, in most cases, the top of funnel stories are the least frequent category, followed by quadrants 3 and quadrants 2. We're very good at getting conversions, more so than we're getting both page views and conversions. The problem is, it's this section down here, quadrant 4. It contains the largest share of stories. It ranges anywhere from 40 to 60% of the stories are what we would consider below average. The goal then of what we're trying to accomplish is to how do we help an organization move these stories up? So the way we start that conversation, it has to do with how we're looking at content and personalization and AI. Again, everyone is trying to jump into the AI conversation. Everyone's trying to figure out how exactly to do this. This is kind of our roadmap for where we would like to be and where we would like to help publishers get. So in the categories, this goes from stage 1 to stage 4. The first stage, and the ones in the blue, are what we're going to talk about here in a minute. That's the foundational localized AI, things that you can do, tools that you can use, activities that you can actually run through AI tools in order to gain followers, gain audience, and gain conversions. Once you get past the foundation, you start working into the personalized AI. Then it gets into AI at scale. We're calling that the organizational AI. And then finally, the enterprise level AI is when everything in your organization is AI. And we call that AI competitors, because at that moment, you can compete with AI against anyone in any industry. That's a very long way away. So what we want to show you today is how we use metadata tagging, how we do basic content recommendations, topic classifications, and then again, the first conversation about how AI newsroom training works. We will not be reading this entire slide, but what we want to point out is, again, metadata tagging leads to topic classification, leads to content recommendations. So when I meet with newsrooms, one of the first sentences I always hear is, this story always works. This story never works. There is so much important information that the newsrooms actually contain anecdotally about how their stories are doing. What we want to do is use AI and ML to generate the titles, the tags, the categories, and the summaries based both on what AI thinks, but more importantly, what the newsroom thinks. Because the newsroom has all of that subject matter expertise where they will tell you these are the types of things that work and these are the types of things that don't. So what we do with the metadata tagging then is we will then work here to inform those topic classifications. And there's a series of tools that we use to do that kind of work. Once the tagging is done, we move on to the second stage, which is topic classification. And this is where, again, this is by far the most important thing we can probably leave with this section. We speak again to the newsroom and they tell us what those classifications are. We then take that information and then we actually will turn that into an artificial intelligence program that will allow us to then tag all of the other stories. So we will look at anywhere from 10 to 100 stories with the newsroom. They will tell us what they see in those stories and what worked and what didn't. We will take that information, use artificial intelligence to tag everything else. The reason why that's important is once we have that asset, the newsroom's input and information, we usually identify strong and weak content very well. After we get done with topic classification, we move on to content recommendations. And this is where, again, we, as analysts, want to be very careful. We are not telling them what stories to write. And when we think about what the tagging and the topics actually do, we don't want to know the one story that did great, that they should do 10 more of those. What we're trying to do is find general ideas of what the stories are and what they're doing in the stories that do have success. Once we get those recommendations, we feel that that is a way to identify that technique. And that drives page views per session, deeper engagement, and heavy without any heavy infrastructure. So how do we go about doing this? When we actually go through this exercise, we will meet with the newsroom, we'll interview them, we'll go through the metadata tagging, we'll go through that effort. We then do the math and we do the analysis on the newsroom's behalf. And then it really isn't that difficult to do what we do next. We essentially chart it out. So what you're looking at on this page is what's the output of the improved content mix. So again, as I said, we do the metadata tagging, we meet with them, we have that conversation of what we know that this works better than that. We then apply the AI to tag all the stories. The tags look like this. So you'll see things like religion, right? Religion stories, right? Single cause stories, analysis stories. Again, things from like that are subcategories, cover stories, breaking news. Other things like this, look around the corner, is something that this specific newsroom said, we write the story and then ultimately we then have the ability inside of the story to tell people this is what's coming next or this is what you should be looking for next. So this is not a category. This is not a section or a subsection. This is them actually telling us what the content means. And what we're doing here is we're laying it out. So what you see here is on this chart, after doing all of that work, looking at, in this instance, the 60 to 70 tags, we can identify the ones that are significant. And we can tell the newsroom, when you write, obviously, breaking news up here in the corner, yes, breaking news is still very important and it's driving the day. So those stories are obviously going to be the best. The newsroom both agrees with and understands that. Cover stories do well, but then they can start looking here and saying, all right, when we do this concept, the look around the corner, you get more conversions. Those are the types of stories that actually drive more conversions. So from an analyst standpoint, we don't know how to write the look around the corner, but what we're giving them as information is saying the look around the corner allows them to know that that's the type of content that their readers like and that they're willing to pay for. On the other side of the chart, and this is the numbers here are how many stories were written for this publisher over a series of time. There's a different type of story called the single cause story. And this is a national media brand. And within the national media brand, the single cause means that they're writing a story that's hyper-local. And that hyper-local story has a certain feel for the area. It has a certain outcome for the area. But once again, it's a hyper-local story in a national brand. The reason why that's important is what we're seeing and what we can suss out is statistically, these stories don't do as well. So what this chart and what this exercise is doing is we are trying very hard, again, to give the guide rails to both the newsroom editorial staff, but also the writers to say, we love it when you write look around the quarter stories. Numbers in the title seem to be effective. A lot of page views on your lists. Data stories are great. But when you write a single cause story, before you do it, just keep in the back of your mind that the probability of it actually driving a lot of success is not very high. So what we're doing here is we are not trying in any way, shape, or form to say, don't write those stories. But what we want to say is there a compelling reason to write it? So, because again, that's the goal of this exercise. We're just pointing out that a certain type of story does not necessarily do great. How do we go about adjusting it so it would not fall down here in the lower production area, but fall somewhere here in the better production?
Hello?
Yeah.
I just want to kind of synthesize what I think I heard you say over the last few slides. So I think kind of the current like tagging configurations are kind of limited. So if we can create a new level of metadata tagging and classification, working with newsrooms, and then tap into their expertise, and then use kind of AI to, develop the content recommendations, you can do all of that where it'll allow you to, right now they're a little hamstrung with the level of tagging and analytics, and this kind of unlocks that. And so we're not telling newsrooms what to write, but we're figuring out what works through better classification and allows them to make better decisions and just tap into their knowledge, which doesn't come through in the current set of their analytics.
100%. You hit it right on the head, Pete. So if you were to think about it this way, from a newsroom standpoint, we do not come in only with best practices at a generalized level. What we want to do is tap into, as Pete said, the most important subject matter experts in your building, the professionals that write your stories, figure out what they know, and then come back to them with guidance on whether or not what they think is true, whether they think is significant, and whether or not it's positive or negative. So ultimately, yeah, that's the goal. And we want to hand that both to the journalists and then to the editors so that they can have this type of informed decision before writing their stories. Again, this shouldn't be a long conversation, but ultimately, these are the types of things that we want to put in their hands.
Great.
Yes. And then just very quickly, one of the parts that it starts tying together, we want to talk about breaking news for a second, because as you think about all that we've just talked about, so breaking news on this chart is the strongest by far of the category that you would see. That is not surprising to anybody. So we know that that's the case. But what's going to start happening, and this is the rolling it all back up into the AI overview. As you think about what's going to be writing the stories, one of the new variables that we're going to have to talk about is it just news and update? Meaning, when you write the breaking news, is it news and update? If it is, are you competing with both the social media platforms that are pushing the stories out very quickly? But now you're also going to start competing against the idea of that story being in the AI overview. So now the newsroom is going to have yet another competitor for that breaking news. One of the things that we're learning as we go along, these other ideas, like the look around the corner, how does news start to then adjust a bit and get away from just providing the news and update and then turning it into more, we're the partner in the community that's actually providing the information that no one else can. So that's,
hey, Luke.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but I know we're getting a little short on time, so I think it'd probably be good to go to the Q&A now.
Yes.
So Brooke, I don't know if we got questions queued up.
Yes, I've been answering them a little bit as we go, but Luke, do you want to just talk a little bit about the process of people are looking for a list of tags and their definition. So what would that look like for them and what we can provide?
We can provide the list of tags based upon the clients that we have. So we would start there, but then we would love to have a conversation, a short one, with your newsroom to enhance that list. So like I said, we can provide the beginning best practice list of tags and then work our way through with individual clients on that. But that is absolutely something we can provide.
Great. And then the last one, I think Bonnie brought up an interesting point when we were talking about the correlation between channels and visitors and the smaller brands. Maybe could it be that their low correlation is due to the size of their teams? What kind of impact do you think has?
Yeah, so we'll go back to that slide because that's, and again, this is part of the audience conversation that we'd like to have with the entire group independently, because exactly what we are thinking is that, yes, there is a larger group of people here in those larger organizations. And that's why whenever something important is happening, they're putting all of their audience resources against all the channels. And that's why you see it. That's exactly what we think, is that the smaller teams are having a hard time keeping up across all the channels. There might not be enough time. There might not be enough space. There's all kinds of issues going on. And that's what we think is happening here.
Great.
So again, what we can do is, depending upon who the brand is, we can look specifically at individual brands and see if that brand is having the same issue, right? So we can look specifically at one and say, what does theirs look like?
Absolutely. Well, I think that we're out of time, but this is very insightful. Please continue to ask your questions and reach out to any of us, Luke, Pete, or myself, and we'd be happy to help and continue on this discussion. Anything else you want to close out with, Luke or Pete?
No, I was just going to say thanks everybody for joining. Hopefully it was insightful looking at some of the macro trends, some of the impact of AI and what's really happening and not, and then what are some ideas on how to tackle it. So great job, Luke. I thought it was really well done.
Thank you. Just one last thing. Starting next month, we are going to introduce our friend Dan. Sorry, real quick. I moved the document. My apologies. Next month is going to be with Bangor News Media's Dan McLeod. He's going to talk about how they are performing better in the last 6 months and what techniques they are actually using to do so. So it'll be some content and then some newsroom conversation in general. So please come back next month. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.